Cloud. Let's see. All right, good evening. Well, thank you for joining this evening's webinar series from the Grand Lodge, Minnesota. Tonight we will be talking about York Rite Masonry in Minnesota. As we've talked about previously, this is not a tiled meeting, so please govern yourselves accordingly. These sessions are being recorded. Please keep yourself on mute during the presentation. If you do need to unmute yourself, you can use the space bar to temporarily unmute yourself. Send any questions you have during the session to the host. We will be sure to cover them at the end. We'll also open up the mics, so to speak, and let everyone ask questions at the end. There is a poll that I'll submit about 5 minutes or so before the end of this session. Please be sure to submit it before you leave. And these videos will show up on the Grand Lodge YouTube channel around about Saturday when I get a chance to post them and all that fun stuff. So tonight we're going to be, upcoming schedule. We're skipping next week because of the Grand Lodge annual communication. And then we jump into a 3-part series by Most Worshipful Brother Terry Tilton, which should be really good. We have the new Grand Master attending a Q&A session here the first part of May. And then Worship Brother Brad will be back to talk about some other topics that he's got. As we, there is the show and tell challenge still going on by the Grand Lodge. If you want to submit, a content, essay, poetry, answering one or more of these following questions, please do so. You can get more information at the URL at the bottom. As we spoke about the upcoming annual communication, the Minnesota Masonic Charities is putting on a Masonic history trivia contest via Zoom on Friday, April 9th, starting at 6. You would register at the Minnesota Masonic Charities website. As we're talking about upcoming schedules, we are making a call out for various, if brothers have an interest in presenting a topic or a paper or some presentation on these webinar series, please send an email to the mentoring committee, or you can reach out via phone. We will, respond back to those phone calls, and you can do a presentation. We'll talk about the process and all the fun details, so that you can be a presenter. And now, without any further ado, I give you Worship Brother Dave Camp talking about York Rite Masonry. Worship Brother, it's all yours.
You should have got me unmuted. That's very good. Thank you, Jason. For anyone that really doesn't know or how to understand how much fun it is to work with Jason when you know that he trusts you enough to make you co-host in one of his meetings. That is a wage that is not earned easily. So watch me so I don't mess this up too much. Jason, everyone can see my my introductory screen.
You are good to go.
I am good to go. Thank you very, very much. It's a pleasure to be here this evening doing this. This is fun for me. This evening was originally intended to be the presentation on Scottish Rite Masonry in Minnesota. I want to believe I'm a little more versed on the things in Scottish Rite Masonry. I've really only been a York Rite Mason for 17 years. I've seen a lot and done a lot since then, but it's been a much shorter period of time. But this evening's presentation for Scottish Rite got pulled ahead for 2 weeks. They were still looking for someone to do a York Rite presentation, and so I actually went to Grand High Priest Carl and illustrious Grand Master Greg and Right Eminent Grand Commander Sean and said, hey, would you 3 guys be okay if I took a run at this? And again, in Masonry, new things happen all the time. That was one of the quickest yeses I think anybody's ever received out of any of our grand officers ever in the state of Minnesota. So I'm happy to be here doing this. What follows, so my thanks to those guys for sure, to our leaders. What follows is really the world according to Dave, and it's not fully authorized, I don't think, as the position of our grand York Rite bodies, but I hope to get kind of close and be able to touch upon some things, hopefully a refresher and a reminder, and also maybe on some things that is new for some folks. Let me get this to roll ahead. Now we're looking, as I did last time, it's always good to start out with some kind of a quote, and I picked this one from George Washington because it does help tie back together that really and truly indeed, York Rite Masonry. York Rite Masonry is one of those things to help promote happiness within the human race. And I truly believe that. I know, notwithstanding what my presentation will be here this evening, I hope guys walk away with a bit of that for sure. This was fun last time also. It's important to point out the elephant in the room when talking about Scottish Rite Masonry. It has nothing to do with Scotland, where the corollary is exactly the opposite here. York Rite Masonry and its degrees can be directly traced from the city of York in the United Kingdom. So we have just this fundamentally solid grounding without having to make any excuses or oh, by the ways, as we begin talking about York Rite Masonry. Our York Rite consists really of 4 bodies, and we'll talk more about all of this, but the one that I hope to remind guys of is that our Masonic lodges, our Blue Lodge, our Grand Lodge forms an inextricable part of our York Rite Masonry in Minnesota. With these other 3 bodies, those 4 combined are our York Rite of Masonry. This particular graphic is one I enjoy immensely. One, because it's a really good quality graphic. It's just nicely done. It's simple. It conveys, as we know in symbols in Masonry, it conveys many, many lessons, many, many instructions, some of them very visible, and some of them not so visible. And the very subtle thing I like about this particular graphic is it does show the interconnected relationship between all 4 of our York Rite bodies. And that's why I just like that graphic a lot. As I said, we all know and we love that Masonry teaches and instructs by the symbols. Most of what you receive, not all, most of what you received in the Blue Lodge was reasonably well explained to you. And that's not necessarily so in the York Rite or in the Scottish Rite. To use a line from the Scottish Rite, which is still very true here, we do not reveal our secrets without compensation. No, we're not talking about slipping some money under the table to Jason. We're talking about the compensation required for a Master Mason to study on his own those things which have meaning for him in York Rite Masonry and for which he gets to be a new discoverer every single time. Again, symbols just all over the place. I'm certainly not going to touch on all of these, but it's as I put this together and refined it and improved it, I kept plucking other symbols from the web and other symbols that I have, and it's kind of, there is so much here. So we'll start going in. But this, in and of itself, is a great primer because, A, I like math, and so here's a reminder, there's going to be some math involved here. One of the things that helps us frame the conversation on our York Rite degrees is that there's an interesting and very different way of talking about dates, both in the craft lodges, in our chapters, in our cryptic councils, and in Knights Templar. We've got some different ways of talking about dates and assigning dates that actually have to do with, I'll back up one, actually have to do with events or stories or personalities or people in each of those bodies. And so even this symbolically helps us point to those things that we might gloss over very quickly, but indeed carry a deeper meaning in all of what we do in York Rite Masonry. If you want to, we can go into the math. That's not my intention here. This is actually these things on Masonic dates as secretary for our chapter, because some of this was not explained in Blue Lodge. It's an easy thing to explain and then point out to new Mark Masters and new companions in our chapter. Hey, there's lots of stuff here to learn and study. Let's get on it. So the degrees are, as we always see in Masonry, a progression of moral teachings, again, told with symbols, allegory, and legend. And this last bullet is so true, and it makes it immensely fun across all of Masonry. Sometimes the lessons are presented in an order different than how they were alleged to have occurred in our stories or in our allegories. And it makes for just a wonderful opportunity, particularly in York Rite Masonry, to circle back on some of those things, maybe not even lightly explained in Blue Lodge, not even explained at all. And that is one of the great pieces in York Rite Masonry. I like this slide too, because it's a question that comes to me frequently in my roles in Masonry. Holy buckets, I may not want to join other Masonic groups because, that stuff I had to do in Blue Lodge, that catechism, a series of fixed questions and answers with precepts used for instruction, that catechism in the Blue Lodge, which is really, really important in Blue Lodge, that no longer exists in the other Masonic, in the Masonic rites. A candidate will no longer be required to stand either alone or in front of other people and recite the lessons that he's learned, because there's so much there to learn, and sometimes some guys don't do as well on that, and it's intimidating and puts them off or scares them away. So this is a great message in all of the Masonic rites, that work that you experienced in the Blue Lodge is now done. I am really going to move through this very quickly. If anybody's disappointed that I don't go into long dissertations of the degrees inside each of the three bodies, you get to do the next presentation. But I'm really, really comfortable on going very quickly over the degrees because there's so much more to cover. In capitular Masonry, in the capitular degrees, as it's sometimes called in Royal Arch, we have the 4 degrees: Mark Master, Past Master, Virtual, Most Excellent Master, and Royal Arch. In the Council, there's actually 2 required degrees, and the Super Excellent Master, which is really not the terminal degree in the Cryptic Council, is the last one, but it is optional. It's not, I don't know what the percentage of Cryptic Masons have received or have not received Super Excellent degree. It's probably a pretty high percentage, but it's still an optional degree within that body of York Rite Masonry. And it's for the Templar degrees, or the orders as they're called in Knights Templar. There are actually 4 degrees, as those of us who have done the ritual recall. The Mediterranean Pass is extremely simple and condensed degree right now, but it actually alludes to the Hospitallers of St. John. And I want you to remember that later on, because it'll be an interesting lesson in how things have actually moved and shifted as we have, here comes a deep gasp, interjected innovations in Masonry. Remember, that's not supposed to be allowed, but hey, we end up doing it all the time. I've had some fun stuff, and I found some more really interesting historic insights when looking at this presentation and about the plan of Masonry. I promise there's not going to be a test here. This really is an eye test. There are many, many of these plans of Masonry around Minnesota and around the world. I particularly like this one. Here's when I get a good chuckle out of Greg Schultz. Everybody watch Greg for a little bit here. I particularly like this particular plan or this diagram of the degrees of Masonry because it's from 1956, and I happen to think 1956 is a very, very good year. Greg might say 1955, but 56 was a very good year. It was given to Harmon Rolifson from, I think, Sharon Lodge in Wilmer, Minnesota. And as I said, there's a number of these all around the internet, some in great detail. I happen to like the older ones because we're going to look at something here on this older. This is just the same chart. I'm zooming in. Here we start right here in York Rite Masonry with the Royal Arch degree, the 4 degrees, as I talked about them previously, comprising the chapter. But then instead, sometime way back, not that far back in antiquity, one could move from a chapter directly to the commandery without, I will say, experiencing the council degrees. I put a question in a Marv Schindel. I didn't hear back from the day. I was looking for exactly when that happened. I think that was within the last 15 years. Greg? His head's going that way. We'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at that. But it's interesting. Here's this innovation that within the past 15 years, and this chart being from 1956, they decided to put the council degrees in a direct path to the commandery degrees. And that is actually been the subject of great and many discussions, I'm sure, in the smoke-filled halls of York Rite Masonry. This one companion's opinion is it's been a tremendous benefit to York Rite Masonry. I'll focus only for a minute on one other interesting piece, and you see here's commandery. Now someone goes chapter, council, and commandery. From the Scottish Rite side, obviously the 32nd degree we know and love. Back in the old days, and I think this was within the past 20 years, you had to be a member of both the Scottish Rite or the York Rite in order to join the shrine. Since that time, again, many, many smoke-filled rooms, that requirement for membership in the rites, either of the rites or both of them, has been removed. A Master Mason can move directly from his Blue Lodge to the shrine. Many, many smoke-filled and libation-fueled discussions about whether or not that's been good or bad for the fraternity. But I will, as they say, leave that one as an exercise for the student. I found another one of these, which is obviously newer. It's in color, and I don't think someone did this with Crayolas. This is actually from the state of Missouri, a southern jurisdiction state. So here we see the Scottish Rite, very nicely detailed. But here now we show the chapter degrees, then the council degrees, and finally the orders of Knights Templar, all in their nice succession, as we know now. And it also shows these very interesting, we'll talk about them later, Order of High Priesthood, the Order of the Silver Trowel, or the Past Illustrious Master degree, some chair degrees, which are just a real interesting phenomena in York Rite Masonry. I like this chart too. I'll go in detail in the next chart. Herein we start seeing about something about some of the other invitational or the optional bodies within York Rite Masonry, which make it from this companion's opinion, just a ton of fun. This is one, I've got one more of these because I love this one too. This one is actually dated. It's from 2011, so it's relatively recent, but it's from Queensland in Australia. And I picked this particular one because it certainly minimizes the Scottish Rite work. I'm okay with that. But look at now the different ways that in Australia and under the Grand Lodge there, they divide up the Royal Arch degrees. Here's the chapter degrees and a Mark Lodge, a Mark Master's Lodge, very different than what we see here. Two forms of commandery over here in the Grand Priory of Queensland, but also down here, the District Grand Priory from the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Very interesting. The Red Cross of Constantine degrees are very consistent here, but I use this one to point out, and those that are in the know, here's an interesting group, the Masonic Order of Athelstan. It is recognized in Australia, and for those that are interested in finding out, Minnesota is one of the few places in the continental United States that has a chapter or a lodge for Athelstan. Just some interesting stuff if you want to dig around the internet for some history. Everyone has got to recognize, since I've got the talking stick, I'm going to talk about what is, I believe, the most important and the most monumental Masonic artifact in the state of Minnesota, in the possession of the Scottish Rite, but indeed, this is a York Rite window at the Minneapolis Scottish Rite. I want to point this out ever so briefly. There's so much here to unpack. But remember, we talked about innovations in Masonry and the changes that some of the degrees have gone through and the order of the bodies, some optional, now not optional. Pay attention here to about the 830 position on this rose window. You see the cross of the Red Cross degree of the orders for Knights Templar orders. Next up here at about 10 o'clock position, you actually see the cross and the crown of the Knights Templar. Well, wait a minute. Knights Templar is the terminal degree in Knights Templar, is it not? What is it doing next to the Red Cross? Wait a minute. Here's the multi-cross way over here. How can this be any kind of an order in Knights Templar? Because what is this? This is the Mediterranean Pass, or what was previously called the Knights Hospitaller of St. John, back in 1907, when this window was designed and constructed. That Knights Hospitaller of St. John was the terminal degree in Knights Templar. Since that time, in the interceding 114 years, people have seen fit to change the order of these degrees. And it's just, anyone who thinks innovation isn't permitted in Masonry, pay attention to this fun stuff. I actually like, this is a very beautiful rendition of now the penultimate sign, the symbol in Knights Templary, but I want you to pay attention as I back up. You can see in this window a letter L, something, a letter D, something, a letter B, something else, and the letter A. My next slide shows indeed that is the letter B for the birth of Christ, L for his life. And here we see a D for his death, R for his resurrection, and A for his ascension, in between them being other symbols, a star, a bell, a hand, and some wings. This window, I truly believe, is one of the grandest artifacts of Masonry, and particularly York Rite Masonry in Minnesota. I've had a little pick on the terminal degrees on Knights Templar, but the same really applies for the terminal degrees in the other two York Rite bodies, and that is they are beautiful degrees, chock full of lessons. But it's those preparatory degrees in each of the body which holds in and of themselves some amazing stories and legends that, as I said, those symbols and those things to be explored by everyone who enters those rites. I especially like this idea. This is mine. I've created this on my own because, being a dedicated Scottish Rite guy, a dedicated York Rite guy, no one pays enough attention to those places across all of those degrees, across both of those rites, where they come together so amazingly. At the bottom, you see telling the story, in some cases, of three individual distinct guys. Their stories told both in the York Rite, in the Scottish Rite. Adoniram, Zabud, and Zerubbabel featured in these degrees, the Royal Arch degree in the York Rite, the Lodge of Perfection degree of the Royal Arch of Solomon being its mirror degree on the Scottish Rite. The same for the Select Master degree in the Cryptic Council, very, very closely tied to Zabud and the Sleeping Guard, whose name we won't talk about. In the Commandery, the Order of the Red Cross is the spitting image of the degree, with Zerubbabel as the star of that degree. And of course, the Knights Templar degree of the Order of the Temple and the Knight Kadosh for the 30th degree in the Scottish Rite. Companions and brothers all, there is years and maybe even centuries of just great Masonic research in where and how these two rites come together, how they play with each other for a while, and then they separate off to do some very different and interesting things. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the other places to journey in York Rite Masonry along with those three principal bodies. But I want to point out, I use the words along with and not the words after, because any brother, any companion can collect through his career more degrees than a thermometer. Collecting those degrees and making that the aim of your journey in Masonry, if that's the aim of your journey, then so be it. These other degrees are really not intended to be something that replaces your Blue Lodge or your York Rite or your Scottish Rite degrees. It's something to add to them and add to your personal enjoyment and add to your journey. There are chair degrees I mentioned, both in the chapter and in the council. These are just beautiful degrees. I won't go into the detail of them. I was able to find some symbols for them. We're going to leave it at that, but they're beautiful. Chair degrees, additional degrees that one gets an opportunity to see and learn about from these two bodies. There are some invitational bodies that are invitation only within the York Rite. The York Rite York Rite Sovereign College, the Order of Knight Masons, and the Orders of the York Cross of Honor. Carl, you had that when you showed up. You had that symbol. These are three of the invitational bodies that go along with all of the orders, all of the bodies in York Rite Masonry. And lo and behold, there's still more, what are called more invitational bodies. Some of these actually have limited membership, so it's not something that everyone can go join. They are invitational bodies within the York Rite, each of them fundamentally requiring that a companion be a member in good standing with a recognized York Rite chapter. Again, the internet is rich with loads and loads of information, and heaven be told, even some of the ritual for these orders, the invitational orders, the chair degrees, and even the limited membership orders, you can go peruse that if you want. I would recommend you stick with those bodies you belong to, because there's more than enough to unpack there. Same in line with what I talked about for the Scottish Rite a couple of weeks ago. Each of our York Rite bodies in the Blue Lodge, in the chapter, council, and commandery have individual and statewide and national honors that are awarded to in recognition for a brother or a companion or a Sir Knight who has exhibited exemplary service to any or all of those bodies, or to his community, or to his Grand Lodge, anywhere across the line. These are just great honors. They're very, very individualized. I chose not to go into them because I don't even know what all of them are. Again, your own internet research will lead you to understand. And when you see lots of letters of names, lots of letters after guys' names, it's not because, like Dan Sherry, they're a doctor of veterinary medicine, a DVM. It's because Dan has gone and done so many things in support of Freemasonry and in support of our Grand Commandery that indeed he's been awarded many, many honors from across Masonry. At the state and national levels, and here's an interesting part for York Rite that is quite a bit different than our Scottish Rite. there is some very predictable polity organizational structure. Here's a new good word. It's not very many letters. It's the polity means the form of or process of government or the constitution for a body. There's many, many similarities in between our various Masonic institutions at our state and even with our Grand Lodge. A similar chart looking at from our York Rite in Minnesota, the 4 bodies as we talked about, and York Rite Masonry across the United States. Again, there's not a national Grand Lodge. There are Grand Lodge organizations, but there's not a national Grand Lodge. But indeed, in each of the other 3 bodies in York Rite, both from a national level and from an international level, there are grand bodies that help aid and assist our local state bodies. I made a late add to this one here, recognizing everyone should know it and be aware, but in August this summer, the Grand Encampment for Knights Templar of the United States of America will be holding their once every 3 years. Their triennial conclave will be here in Minneapolis. A new, most excellent Grand Master of the Grand Encampment of Knights Templar will be elected and installed. The guy in charge right now, Jeff Nielsen from North Dakota, just a fantastic guy. Each of our state bodies are sovereign unto themselves. They have their progressive lines. And this summer, Greg and Carl and Sean Gardner will be moving on after their year of service, and a new set of officers will be elected and installed, and we're looking forward to that. I would encourage folks to go to the Grand York Rite or the York Rite website, but it's under construction right now. Bits and pieces of it are great and up and running, and other pieces not so much. Carl, I couldn't even get a picture of you in a red jacket, so it's kind of I didn't want to do something wrong. A couple of last things I want to leave with. I know I'm getting close on time. You've heard me talk about it a number of different ways, that Masonry is a journey. I truly believe that. Except for the last year, I've truly wanted to live that because my traveling wings have been clipped, as have everybody else's. I want to borrow a perspective from a favorite travel writer of mine, Anthony Bourdain. He talks in his newest book, actually published posthumously because he died in 2019, some thoughts from him about traveling to Paris. Now, this is a picture of me, and no, it's not in Paris, but please don't get bogged down in the details. Paris is a beautiful, beautiful city. His advice on travel, most important thing to do when you get there is stop. Just stop and think about taking it in. This is me actually at the not a Grand Lodge, at the Masonic Lodge in the town of Cork in Ireland. Knock on the door. Unfortunately, we were there in the summertime and they were dark. I didn't get much of an opportunity to participate with anyone there. What Anthony Bourdain says about Paris is, don't overpack your itinerary. The same way I would want to talk about Freemasonry and talk about our rites. Don't overpack your itinerary or you're going to miss the magic. Slow down and savor a place. Grab a seat at a sidewalk cafe or in a warden's chair or in a deacon's chair. Sit at the end of a dive bar. And now, please, I don't want anyone thinking I'm equating any of our Masonic bodies with a dive bar. But those who have ever enjoyed a dive bar, or they call it dodgy in the UK, if you've ever enjoyed a place like that, it's a place to really connect with people who are local to where you're at. I cannot emphasize enough how much that has enriched my travel across the world and in Freemasonry, to connect with someone who is a local. This is me at the Roslyn Chapel meeting a guy who was in surgery 3 days prior to this. He came out of his bed to come down and greet Barbara and I and give us a personal tour of Roslyn Chapel in Scotland. I cannot pass up my opportunity to talk about our philanthropies. But you know me, I'll stick a Scottish Rite quote in there from Albert Pike, that indeed what we do for ourselves alone will die with us, but what we have done for others does live on and is immortal in the world. So in each of our three bodies, the internet is just full of the great information about these philanthropies supported by our York Rite, both in Minnesota and at a national level and at an international level. I can't emphasize enough that this is what we do for society, and this is what will help our legacy live on long after we are gone. So this is York Rite. Be gentle with her. And as the admonishment goes, be ready to pass her on in a condition that better than what she was delivered to you, so that what we continue to do does live on and is immortal in York Rite Masonry. Companions and brothers, that's my little spiel, the world according to Dave, and York Rite Masonry this evening. I'll make apologies for the York Rite of Minnesota website. It is under construction, I know it's going to look great when it gets done. I'll point to everyone there, and please visit periodically to see what improvements they're launching forward there. And I will stop my sharing and certainly entertain any questions from the crowd.
Thank you, Worshipful Brother Dave, for that presentation. I know Worshipful Brother Juniper had a question about the chair degrees and what is a chair degree exactly? Do you have a brief definition of that?
I do indeed. Oh, Carl's got good. Oh man, time. Dave's going to take a drink of water. Carl's on it.
Carl.
Yes, is that Brother Juniper is once you have served in the East for the particular body that you are in, then you are eligible to take the chair degree. And that is literally what it is. So once you have completed your term as the high priest of your chapter of Royal Arch Masons, you would be eligible to take the order of high priesthood.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Brother Juniper?
Just kind of wondering where the title comes from, why it's called a chair degree.
It comes from you having sat in the chair in the East.
And indeed, I'm a big dummy because I missed that one in my chart in our connection with the Blue Lodges, because many of us know when you finish your term in the East in your Blue Lodge, you're entitled to take the past master degree. And it's a degree that's usually put on, but is my word now, in bulk. There's a number of past masters from another lodges around. Some lodges do their own past master degree, but it is the chair degree of your Blue Lodge presenting those final lessons about that particular body, either Blue Lodge or chapter or council or commandery. It's just I forgot to add that one, and that's my bad. I'll update the charts.
Thank you.
More questions.
More questions. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
I have a comment that I'd like to make. Is that the first comment I have is that the charities that Dave outlined in his presentation, you do not need to be a member of those bodies to make contributions. And so that's one item that there's a big misconception about. And they're all very important charities. And there's much information on their websites about specifically what they do. One that I really enjoy is the one for the Council of Cryptic Masons, CMMRF, because they do research into vascular disease. and I was able to learn within the past couple of weeks, is that they are using stem cells to regenerate heart muscle. And anybody who's ever studied the subject knows that when heart muscle died, the only way to regain heart muscle was to get a transplant. And I think that that's very significant.
While you have the floor, Brother Carl, would you introduce yourself a bit? Since you're wearing your bling, we want to make sure you introduce yourself.
My name is Carl Lidstrom, and I'm the Grand High Priest of the Grand Chapter of Royal Arch Masons of Minnesota. And I'm also a past most illustrious Grand Master of the Grand Council of Cryptic Masons of Minnesota, and I currently serve as the Rite Puissant Deputy General Grand Master for the North Central region of the General Grand Council of Cryptic Masons International. So I'm engaged in the York Rite.
That's a mouthful. Greg, you want to give yourself a quick introduction since you're here?
Sure, yeah. And Carl's the only one that can say that whole lingo in the proper order. So, yeah. My name's Greg Schultz, and I am the illustrious Grand Master of the Grand Council of Cryptic Masons of Minnesota. And I'm also a past Grand High Priest of the Grand Chapter of Royal Arch Masons of Minnesota. And good job, worshipful brother Dave. I enjoyed you hit it. You know, you have to hit it pretty high there. So you didn't delve into many details. And anyone who's been in York Rite Masonry for a while finds out there's lots of details. It's kind of like, it's like an onion. You peel one layer and amazing, there's another layer. And you peel the next one and amazingly, there's another layer. And it goes on. And it's one of the beauties, I think, of the York Rite. I would like to make one quick comment, though, that things you don't always think about, and I find very unique to the York Rite. We are a fraternal organization, and you think about the Scottish Rite, no offense, Dave, but the Scottish Rite is a big building in a big city, and everybody goes to that big building. In the York Rite, we're dispersed among all the lodges, or they're called different things, but we meet in Masonic lodges throughout the state. So it's a smaller group, and what's really fun about it is you get to travel to all different chapters, different councils, different commanderies, and you get to meet people you would never meet if it weren't for the York Rite and being involved in the York Rite. I would never know Carl, I would never know Dave if it were not for the York Rite. And everybody I talk to just really enjoys that feature. We think nothing of getting in the car and driving to another community and join in a meeting. And I'm from Owatonna, so we always have pie after our York Rite meetings. And I think Carl shows up at every meeting we have because he wants to have pie. And that extends on to different states. I know I've learned, I've met guys from Wisconsin, the Dakotas, Iowa, Nebraska. We're going, like Carl said, we're going to Nebraska next week, and you foster these friendships, and it's very worthwhile. I think that's one of the parts of, we never talk about that, but it's a big part of the York Rite. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Questions? Anybody have questions that they would like to ask at this point? If you do, please just unmute and ask, or raise your hand. I'll call on you, one or the other. Frank, please go ahead, unmute.
Yeah, I have a question on a different subject. Supposedly the Grand Lodge annual communication is supposed to have satellite stations set up for watching Grand Lodge. Where do you find out about this? I thought somebody in this group might know.
Let's take that one offline. I'll answer it in a little bit. How about that?
Okay.
John, you're on mute.
Am I better now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Dave, excellent presentation. Thank you very much for all the work that you've done. Learned a lot.
Thank you.
Very good. Very good.
Carl, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have another comment is that if you go to England, for instance, and you want to sit in a Masonic lodge, you're going to have to be able to show them that under the American system that you are a Royal Arch Masons. Because in many of the lodges under the system of the United Grand Lodge of England, you are required to complete all 4 degrees, not just the 3 we use. And one of the stories I really love was from past Grandmaster Tom Hendrickson, who wanted to attend a lodge meeting in England. And he goes in and has to show his dues card. And he showed him his lodge dues card. And they said, "And what else do you have?" And so he showed him his past Grand Master card. And they said, "Well, that's very nice, but what else do you have?" And they wouldn't let him in until he showed them his Royal Arch dues card. So one of the things, and I think as a Dave really did well when he talked, and Greg, about the idea of traveling. And traveling is really an important part of Masonry. And so please be advised that if you want to travel the world, then please become more active in the York Rite. We have a good time in the York Rite. The York Rite adds to your Masonic education.
Thank you, Carl. Well, I launched the poll for everyone. If you would please be sure to submit that. Any other questions? If not, we will wrap this up for this evening. And I still have your question to answer, Frank, but we will do in a second. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, I'm going to thank you everyone for attending, and please be sure to take the poll before you leave. Thank you again.